Thank you so much for tuning in to the Logs. Coming up, Episode 9, AC, the Pioneer of the Desert. The Antonio Armijo trading party would carry goods from Mexico to Los Angeles. On their way, they would cross several states and several different trails, one of which was the Old Spanish Trail from New Mexico, leading towards the city of Los Angeles. And on this trail one day, in 1821, a member of the Armijo trading party, by the name of Rafael Rivera, stopped for water to water the horses and quench his own thirst. At that time, there was a section of the Old Spanish Trail that was a valley, and that valley contained many wells surrounded by greenish areas. It was a very beautiful sight to see in what was otherwise a desert. And Rafael Rivera, in the year 1821, commented and named this place Las Vegas, which means the meadows in Spanish. At this time, he watered his horses from what was called the Las Vegas Wash, which eventually would run into the Colorado River. But Las Vegas wouldn't be a city until 1905, after a railroad was constructed that linked the city of Los Angeles to Salt Lake City. Las Vegas became a stopping point on that journey. A lot of farmers were attracted to the area based on its greenery, and new construction projects to bring fresh water into the area were started. And this was a very small town because it began as a farming hub for very few people until 1911 that it was incorporated in what would be called Clark County of the state of Nevada. All the while, Las Vegas was not nearly the metropolis that it is today. Urbanization of the then town took off in the year 1931 because at this point, construction began on the Hoover Dam, which was then called the Boulder Dam. And to fulfill the workforce of this construction project, this intensive construction project, a lot of new workers came into the city. So to house these workers and to entertain these workers, casinos, hotels, and theaters were built. Those theaters, casinos, hotels were built by the mafia, and the electricity that was provided by the Hoover Dam was powering those buildings. Even more importantly, the electricity provided by that dam was powering air conditioning. It is recorded that every decade since 1930 in the city of Las Vegas, the population has doubled. So that's from 1930 to 1940, doubled. From 1940 to 1950, doubled. Remember, in 1905, 1911, 1920, Las Vegas was a town. It was a bunch of people braving the sun. They would use wet towels, hang them on doorways, so that as the air flew into the house or into the building through the doorway, it would be cooled just a little bit. They would also use dynamite to blow up large holes in the ground that was not able to be tilled by human tools because you couldn't break through the rough surface that was created by the sun. So you'd use dynamite to blow up huge holes to plant trees, just so you have some shade from the sun. People remarked at that time that the daylight hours of Las Vegas were just meant for suffering. There was no way to avoid the sun completely. Whether it was in your home, whether it was outside, the sun would burn your skin. But that wasn't true after the air conditioner became a thing. Once more people entered the city due to construction projects like the Hoover Dam, things were built larger. Air conditioners allowed for more people, allowed for comfortable areas where people can relax and escape the sun. And in this way, Las Vegas turned from a small town in the early 1900s to a mega resort that we see today. A large-scale urban environment in the middle of the desert that attracts thousands, tens of thousands of tourists every year. And on this episode, I'm going to make the case that it was only the air conditioner that could cause this advancement of the city and in the development of modern America. Nowhere else in the world has the air conditioner played as big a role as it does in the United States. And later we'll explore just how big a role air conditioning has in developing some of the consumer habits of modern America or modern aspects of our infrastructure. But first, I think it's important to take a look at the history of air conditioning and see where it comes from. It's something that we can turn on nowadays in our house, in our car, at our place of work. Air conditioning is always around us. We can always control our climate and be comfortable in the temperature, whatever temperature that we want to be at. So if you go back thousands of years before any modern civilization, you can see that humans would use things like dipping in the water to control their body temperature. And there are also natural systems that we undergo in our body to control that temperature. Most of them are for staying warm, though, in colder environments. We can only turn down our temperature so much. One of the methods of doing so is sweating. The body will secrete sweat through its sweat glands that empty onto the surface of the skin, and sweat helps you cool down in two ways. One way is just the fact that it's wet, it's a liquid substance, so it coats the skin and helps you feel cooler. And the other way is through evaporative cooling, because as the water molecules in sweat evaporate into the atmosphere, they're releasing heat that would be felt by your body. But sweating can only go so far, because in areas of high humidity, where there's a lot of moisture in the air, evaporative cooling cannot be undergone because there's already a lot of water in the air. Water on your skin can't easily evaporate into the air. So in instances like that, it's only the wet feeling that allows you to feel a little cooler. So these are the very ancient and very natural systems that we undergo when we feel hot temperatures. But of course, humans contain the unique ability to develop technologies that allow them to battle the elements and change their temperatures. The temperature, of course, of the environment that they're in. And it wasn't until the Roman era that large-scale advancements in this area were undergone. Remember in episode 5, where we were talking about the infrastructure in the Roman era, the Roman Empire, and how their advancements allowed them to become the greatest empire that the ancient world has ever seen? These advancements weren't just in roads and in aqueducts, things that we talked about in that episode. Romans did many, many more things. Things like controlling indoor air temperature. A lot of wealthy citizens in the city of Rome and across the Roman Empire would take advantage of the aqueduct system throughout the Roman lands. Remember, we said that Rome itself had 11 aqueducts bringing water into the city. So what those Roman citizens did was circulate water through the walls of their home. They would leave openings in between the brick and cement layers of their home in the walls to circulate water through. So even if hot air and the sun hit the outer surface of the building, the water would be an insulating source to keep the inside of the house cool. But of course, these systems were only available to the very rich Roman citizens, as building a house with specific air-conditioned properties with this indoor water cooling was very expensive. And this was probably the greatest advancement in early air conditioning technology. There was a Roman emperor, though, by the name of Elagabalus, who decided to change things up a little bit, if you can use that phrase. He said, instead of creating, a house with air-conditioned properties by indoor water cooling, you know what? Snow is cold. How about I bring snow near my house? So he built a mountain of snow right by his house. In the summer, using donkey trains, he imported snow from the mountains, and he left it in the garden right next to his house to keep cool in the summer. And the older Roman citizens, when they saw these developments in air conditioning technology, were a little appalled. There were philosophers like Seneca that would mock the young people, calling them the skinny youth, because they would eat snow and try to keep cool in the summer months that would be very hot and very dry heat in the Mediterranean climate. Seneca thought that the youth should be bearing the hot of the summer because every Roman ought to do so because it made them a better Roman. And it's not unlike the early Las Vegas residents who knew that their early day, when the sun is out, was filled with suffering. And it just made them who they are, very strong, very grizzled people that were able to bear the heat of the desert. But nonetheless, the go-get-'em attitude of the people that were pro-air conditioning prevailed. Well, it didn't prevail in the dark ages because nothing was going on with air conditioning back then because frankly, nothing was going on, period. It wasn't until the 1800s that air conditioning technologies were pioneered again in the West. The most famous of which, prior to the dedicated air conditioner, was the fan, or the ceiling fan. And this was invented in 1882 by an American man named Schuyler Scotts Wheeler. This was the first electric fan that would blow air directly to you by circulating it with those blades that you see in a fan. And then it was a few years later, in 1887, that Philip Diehl, a German American, mounted the fan blades of Wheeler's design to a motor that powered a sewing machine and then put it on the ceiling. And he invented the ceiling fan, which was aimed to push the hot air that was at the top of the room down to cool it. Because as you know, hot air rises. And here's a fun fact, both Wheeler and Diehl were contemporaries of Thomas Edison. And Philip Diehl had been an inventor for quite a while, and he had a bunch of US patents. One of them was for an electric incandescent bulb, and his bulb was cheaper than Thomas Edison's. So to compete, Edison was forced to reduce the price of his own incandescent bulbs. And I think it's fun and it's important to look at things like that because we always focus on the one inventor, like a Thomas Edison. And we forget that they were surrounded by a whole bunch of other people that were developing and hoping to develop similar things, similar machines to solve the problems that humans faced at that point in time. And now, just so we're clear, in the 1800s, Wheeler and Diehl's inventions of the electric fans were based on technologies that the Chinese developed 3,000 years before them. Hand fans that people would wave to cool down their face. There was also a Chinese inventor that was credited for development the first room size fan, but it was also powered by hand. Somebody would have to turn the fan to cool down the room. And before the advancement of the electric fan, this is what the technology was about. This man-made and man-powered thing, and other things like architecture that influenced cooling within the room that it was around. In the Middle Eastern construction, during the rise of the Arabic Empire, the buildings were constructed in such a way that the windows faced away from the sun. So any air that would flow into the house would flow in from the cool side, thus producing a cold environment within the room. There were other buildings that also featured things called wind towers, and they were designed to catch breezes. So they were faced towards a breeze from which the air could be caught and then circulated right into the room. All these advancements in architecture, similar to those in the Roman era in the internal cooling, led to things like the ceiling fan by Wheeler and Diehl, which allowed for the precise control of air temperature in the room by motor and electric methods. So all these pre-modern advancements in air cooling eventually led to what would be called the air conditioner. And it was at this time in the late 19th century when Americans were starting to get fed up with hot air. It was even said that in 1881, President James Garfield was tired of the sweltering heat in Washington, D.C. And to avoid the hot temperatures, he took solace in a device that involved air blowing through sheets of cotton that were actually doused in ice water. As it may sound, these iced, doused cotton sheets of water would constantly have to be removed and replaced because eventually they would reach room temperature, especially in the sweltering heat of Washington, D.C. in 1881. So during the summer, they would end up using a lot of ice. The caretakers who had to replace these sheets and douse them in new ice water claimed that they would go through 500,000 pounds of ice per 2-month period. It was incredibly inefficient. So there had to be another way to tackle the air conditioning problem. And it came in America in this late 19th, early 20th century period, especially with the advancement of electricity. A figure by the name of Nikola Tesla developed the alternating current motor that was eventually used in the fans that we spoke of earlier, the oscillating ceiling and floor fans. But it was in 1902, and it was a man named William Carrier, at the age of 25, who developed the first modern air conditioning system. He was an engineer based in New York, and he developed a unit that drew air from its surroundings and sent it around water-cooled coils It's very similar to what we talked about earlier with the Roman period and the Roman walls. When you send air around water, the temperature of the air will decrease because it takes a lot of heat to heat up water. So water can actually take heat out of the air. And that's what this machine, this first mechanical air conditioner, was able to do. But when Carrier was designing this first piece of equipment, he wasn't designing it for use domestically. It was actually designed for commercial use in a printing plant that he actually worked in to control the humidity of the plant so the equipment, things like paper and ink, wouldn't be damaged with increasing temperatures in the summer months. As the years went on, this proved to be very useful in things like the printing plant and in other factory settings. So William Carrier decided to update the design of his first air conditioner. It was in 1922 when he announced the centrifugal chiller. It was a new design that added a compressor to the unit to reduce the unit size and allow more airflow. He first unveiled his updated design on Memorial Day of the year 1925, and it debuted in Rivoli Theater in Times Square, New York. What the centrifugal chiller was able to do, and is still able to do, there are around 80,000 centrifugal chillers all around North America, and they're used to power air conditioning through large-scale factories and buildings. So what Carrier's first unit could do at the Rivoli Theater was provide air-conditioned air in the movie theater. And unveiling it so close to the summer, in May, Memorial Day weekend, it drove people to go to the theater. And what's actually really fun about this is you see how something like the summer blockbuster movie developed. It was because of air-conditioned air that drove people in from the sweltering heat of the summer, especially in big cities like New York. It drove people outside, indoors, to air-conditioned rooms at a movie theater. And now we see today, the summer blockbusters are the biggest grossing movies of the entire year. And they still advertise to get out from the heat, come in and enjoy a nice movie in a dark, cooled room. Air conditioners have played a huge role in this phenomenon. This consumer behavior that arenas like Hollywood have taken a liking to and pushed. So all big movies that come out usually come out for the blockbuster season around Memorial Day and go all the way until August. And the largest grossing movies in the entire year are in that segment every year. And isn't it fun to know that the cause of something like a summer blockbuster is an air conditioner? So movie theaters, modern ones, and the one in 1925, the Rivoli Theater, could boast, come and check out this cool new movie. Grab some popcorn, a nice cold drink, and relax in a cool theater. They're hitting every point of the consumer experience and stimulating every feeling that the consumer can feel. And that was because, again, the air conditioner. So next time you're at the movie theater checking out the new summer blockbuster on a very hot day, remember William Carrier and remember what he gave you. A brand new consumer experience. And if we look at this in a wider scope, and we see that at this time when the Rivoli Theater was installing their air conditioner unit, and when William Carrier was updating his original design, America was going from the roaring 20s, and some would say the golden age of Hollywood, to the Great Depression, beginning around 1929, just 4 years after the Rivoli Theater installed their centrifugal air conditioner. And it was this attraction that drove people to go to the movies because during the Great Depression years between 1929 and 1939, many people couldn't afford to install air conditioners in their factories or other commercial buildings, let alone domestic ones. So the movie industry was able to survive on the laurels of William Carrier and by marketing air-conditioned theater rooms. It wasn't until after the war, after America had begun to resurge and enter its own golden period, that air conditioning was starting to arrive in American homes. In the year 1953, there were about 1 million units, air conditioning units, sold in the US. What air conditioning did in that arena was promote the cookie-cutter approach to American building, because home builders, contractors, needed to fund the buildings that they were building. And the utilities in the building, such as air conditioning, were expensive to install. But what contractors were able to do was build a large number of cheaper homes to build and install air conditioning units promoted by utilities industries, such as electric companies, which would be providing electricity to these new suburbs that were built around major cities in the US. Furthermore, this prompted a new form of building because you have to integrate air conditioning units and vents into the building that you're actually building. depending on if you have central air or window-mounted air conditioning units. Rooms had to be built in a way to allow airflow throughout the rest of the home and to be as efficient as possible. Another industry that promoted the sale of air conditioners was the car industry, because air conditioning within the car back then wasn't a commonplace thing that it is today. It was a status symbol. If you had AC for your car, you must have been doing very well for yourself. So car manufacturers like Cadillac and Ford would build higher end cars with features like air conditioning. It became so much of a status symbol that other Americans, maybe lacking air conditioning in their cars, would drive around with the windows closed, even on days where the temperatures cranked up to 90, 95, 100 degrees, just to give the impression that their car was very high-end and had the feature of air conditioning. What became the American dream in terms of a single-family home, a nice car, and a very good family in the 1950s and later into the 60s was built on the push provided by air conditioning units. Millions of people would come to the shores of the US to search for something like this, to find better work, higher paying work, and to purchase a house that they could eventually make into a home for their family. And it's not so different today, is it? We still follow the same principles, and it was built upon conditioned air, promoted by industries that included air conditioning in their product, be that a home or a car. And this promotes investment from people, both private and public. After World War II, as we spoke of in the 50s and the 60s, air conditioning brought millions of people into what is called the Sun Belt of the United States. These are states like Florida, Arizona, Georgia, Texas, Southern California, traditionally very warm states, hence the name Sun Belt. All of those states in the second half of the 20th century experienced above average growth relative to the general rate of growth of the United States population. If you look at from 1950, say post-war period where air conditioners were starting to get very popular in suburban homes and cars, all the way to 2000, and you just look at that second half of the century, those 50 years, you can see in 1950, 28% of the US population lived in those areas of the Sun Belt. In 2000, in 50 years, that grew to 40% of the US population. It would be very hard to explain how that happened without air conditioning. If you look at areas outside of the US, traditionally very hot desert areas and very rich areas, think the Middle East, think of Dubai, how do people live and power their cities, create their personal comfortable environments without air conditioning? How do they run business without air conditioning? What we see now, especially post-2001, into the 21st century, into the computer age, we see that air conditioning does something even more. When computers run, you probably have experienced this in terms of a computer, maybe a phone too. When technology runs, it uses power and creates heat. Sometimes an iPhone will burn up on a hot day, and then it'll shut down to cool itself off, and then it'll shut down to cool itself off. Because technology doesn't work at very extreme temperatures, because the internal microchips, motherboards, and other very complex technical equipment will burn up or melt. When we think of the large-scale computer servers that companies like Google, Apple, game developers, the government own and operate, just think of an epicenter of heat. Because there's a lot of computer equipment in a small area being powered by electricity and running 24/7. Here we see, in terms of technology, the development of the IT industry would be very hard without air conditioning. Here's a good example. You remember when people were mining Bitcoin, and this was this huge craze, the next thing, and now nobody even talks about it. But when people were doing so, they were buying large amounts of computers because you had to undergo complex mathematical equations to actually mine Bitcoin. And this would take a lot of energy from the computer because it would have to constantly keep working and keep sending signals and doing the complex mathematical formulas that are needed to mine Bitcoin. So what people would do is put these computers in very chilled locations so they could run the most efficiently that they can. I saw a story one time on the news where a person was actually dipping the computers into water. He actually developed this waterproof casing where he inserted the desktop computer into, and then he rested all of that into the water so that there's greater heat exchange with the environment. The principles used here by that gentleman mining Bitcoin are not unlike what William Carrier did when he developed his air conditioner. Very high-end personal computers, especially those that are built for gaming, are also integrated with water cooling, basically having the very same pipes that you would see in an air conditioner, of course, with neon lights and funky colors. Those pipes run throughout the computer so they can allow heat dissipation into the pipes, and as the water rushes through them, it just removes the heat, allowing the computer to run very efficiently. And here's another example of how control of temperature, air conditioning, has influenced another industry, an industry that today has connected the world like nothing else ever has before. And so far, we've only been talking about direct impacts of air conditioning in the home, or in the car, or in a server room, let's say, if we're talking about computers. What about indirect effects of air conditioning? How houses are designed for central cooling systems, with vents running like a spider web in and throughout the house, to deliver nice cool air to every single room. Now it doesn't really matter if you build a house against the breeze or with windows away from the sun. Now you just need a good air conditioner, and every room in the house will be comfortable and at the temperature desired. Now, instead of the inside of the house being unbearably hot during summer months, the inside is the best place to be. No longer do people go sit outside on their deck or their porch with a little canopy in the sweltering heat. Just go inside and turn that thermostat to 65, and you have a cool blast of air in every single room you want to be in. And we've shown that, of course, beginning at the Rivoli Theater, air conditioning has promoted the summer blockbuster. But what about promoting television? If we look to the modern day, like what we're experiencing now, streaming TV, we've seen that air conditioning is responsible for maintaining computer systems, server rooms that require cool environments to work efficiently in. So can we make the case here, stick with me on this one, that promotion of things like the internet by air conditioning led to greater amounts of things online, say in terms of streaming services such as Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime. Furthermore, all those things online are more readily accessed by people because the maintenance of those server rooms is promoted by air conditioning. And then, okay, leave that there for a second. Then think of the consumer of these streaming services. They are in their home, say on a sweltering summer night. Not very fun to be outside, but you can go inside and adjust the thermostat to the perfect temperature, and then maybe you pop a bag of popcorn and turn on your TV, your streaming TV, and play some Netflix. Could we make the claim then that air conditioning has promoted the rise of streaming media, and prior to that, the rise of television? Because if we think of, let's say, the 60s, the classic TV dinner era, families would sit in front of the TV all together eating their dinner and watch the shows that are being broadcasted onto TV. Very much like earlier, much earlier than that, in 1925, when people would go into the Rivoli Theater to experience whatever movie was on that night and to be in a very cool environment. Now go back to the 60s when that air conditioning technology was available to more people. They could do the same thing just in the privacy of their own home. And you go now to today, people are able to, of course, watch movies, TV shows using the internet, a thing promoted by air conditioning, and by directly using air conditioning to create a better environment, the most comfortable environment for them in their own home. So we said earlier, would the summer blockbuster have ever existed if air conditioning wasn't a thing? We could ask the same question now. If that technology was never miniaturized and commercialized to the point where families can purchase their own private air conditioner, could there be American TV? American TV that was central and is still central to the American life. Because even if you think about it, just subjectively on your own, if you're sitting on the couch trying to watch some TV, and it's really hot in the room, say it's the summer again, for our example, and you're kind of sticking to the couch, you're going to get up, you're going to leave. But what if you're in that same situation, but the thermostat is on cool and it's very relaxing. There's a nice breeze. Then you're much more ready to sit there, maybe for hours, and binge your favorite show. With the right environment, it becomes a pleasant and enjoyable activity. I'll tell you what else is an enjoyable activity. Going to watch your favorite sports team compete live in their home stadium. Now say, what if that home stadium is in the middle of a desert, in the middle of the summer? And then you pile tens of thousands of people into a crowded stadium. And not only is the 80, 90, 100-degree temperature boiling your skin, but the temperature of every single body around you is. Take the Dallas Cowboys, for example, a football team based in Dallas, Texas. And I understand that most of the football season takes place in the winter and fall. But if you think of the preseason, people go to the preseason games. In August, Dallas has an average of 97 degrees for their high. You think of being in an arena with tens of thousands of people at 97 degrees? There will be no way to enjoy it comfortably. Furthermore, it could be dangerous with possibilities of suffocation and heat stroke. So what AT&T Stadium, the home stadium of the Dallas Cowboys, has is a retractable roof. They can close the roof and then condition the air within the stadium with large centrifugal air conditioners used in things like William Carrier's print factory. Of course, these are much more modern and efficient, but they follow the same basic principles. Those being, 1, cool down as big a room as possible, and 2, cool it down as fast as possible. For another example, we can go back to the Middle East, into the desert, and we can see that engineers are building soccer stadiums that can hold up to 80,000 people in some of these cities. And then you take into account that regular temperatures are in the 90s to hundreds in the middle of the desert. And the only way to maintain a comfortable environment for that amount of people is through air conditioning. And it's through changes in how we build stadiums, now with closed roofs, retractable roofs, and the like. Because not only do we have to build a room as efficient as possible to cool, but we have to build a building that's as insulated as possible, allowing our cooling to actually work. And yet again, we're greeted with another example of the influence of air conditioning in an industry, that being sports. And this falls into our laundry list of things that have been influenced by this great invention, and more so by the people that have promoted it, whether they are the inventors or the buyers. If we look at American energy expenditures today, we can see that air conditioning accounts for 12% of the energy used in U.S. households. And this is in terms of all energy that is pumped into households, be that electricity, natural gas, and so on. If we look at it just in terms of electricity, it's 17% of the total electricity used by American households. Those statistics are all fine, but I think the better way to look at this is to compare it. We say that U.S. households have used 12% of their energy on air conditioning. What if I told you this? What if I told you that Americans use as much energy on air conditioning that all people in Africa use to live? The U.S. has a population of about 325 million. The population of Africa is 930 million. That's close to 3 times the amount of people. And just so we're clear, I said the amount that African people use to live. That includes anything that requires energy, be that very, very essential things, like lights, and everything in between. So if we think about it that way, we see just how powerful a hold air conditioning has in our communities, in the American way of life. It's one thing that now we're starting to take a hold of, starting to turn off a little bit. We use smart thermostats to limit our use and to maintain as low a carbon footprint as we can. And we may try to limit our use, but we cannot limit the impact air conditioning has had on our world. As we advance and as we find new clean methods of energy, both of harvesting and delivering that energy to the people that need it, we cannot lose what we've already had. We cannot lose the cooling breeze that air conditioning brings to a room. We cannot lose the simplicity involved in dialing down a thermostat just a couple notches to combat the heat of a summer day. We cannot lose the feeling of being outside sweating on that day and coming in to a cool blast of air when you enter your home. We cannot lose our air-conditioned houses, our air-conditioned cars, our air-conditioned workplaces, because everywhere we go, we're conditioned. We provide ourselves with the prime environment for comfort, and once we have that, we can be the most efficient we can be. And this positive correlation of behaviors only leads to its reproduction, because more comfort will lead to more productivity, more efficiency in the real world. And when we're comfortable in efficiency, how can we wish to go back? Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Logues, a podcast dedicated to understanding. Please subscribe so you're notified of new episodes and find us anywhere you find podcasts. And please remember to laugh a little.